So much to talk about today, and I can't wait any longer to bring John Rothman on the show. We're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court and another case that they'll be taking on regarding Trump. So let's bring him on right now, Albert. It is John Rothman here on the Mark Thompson Show. Hi.
There's no place I would rather be than with you and Albert right here on the Mark Thompson program.
Absolutely. Well, happy Hanukkah to you.
Thank you. Sixth night and seventh night coming up tonight, and we're having a perfectly grand time. Wonderful. I don't know how many more potato latkes I can eat.
Where's the best place to get a potato latke? Because my son asked me, he has a friend in class that celebrates Hanukkah, and the friend was talking about latkes, and Jacob said, I want to try one. And so
my wife's kitchen, but it's not open for public consumption.
Well, we'll be over.
You
hear a knock on the door.
Even I can make a latke.
Really?
So all you got to do is grate the potato, put it all together, fry it up with oil, and you've got a latke. And then you just have to have either plenty of applesauce, which I like, or sour cream, which others like.
All right. Well, I'm not going to try it, so I'll try to find a restaurant where we can go sample it.
I think, if I may be so bold, I think Trader Joe's has some prepackaged.
Oh, do they? Okay. So. Good. Well, now that we've gotten the important stuff out of the way.
Will you please tell them we did a commercial for them so that...
Yeah, we'll do that. But let's get into it because I wanted to talk to you about, first of all, there's a Supreme Court now taking this case about potentially undoing the Capitol riot charge against hundreds of people, including Trump. So today, the Supreme Court said they will hear an appeal that is a review of an appellate court ruling that will change. It's a charge against 3 defendants accused of obstruction of an official proceeding. So a lot of people that were involved in the Capitol riots were charged with obstructing an official proceeding. The charge referring to the disruption of Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election victory by Joe Biden over Trump. It is among 4 counts brought against Trump in the case brought by Jack Smith and the special counsel, right? That accuses Trump of conspiring to overturn the results of his election loss, including conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. So now the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on whether that's a valid charge.
Well, listen, I'm very clear. Of course, there was an attempt to obstruct the proceedings. Yeah. You and I covered the fact that there was an attempt to obstruct the proceedings. What is interesting is that Jack Smith has decided to go the route of Leon Jaworski, who was the Watergate special prosecutor, asking for an immediate ruling by the Supreme Court. And it is vital to Donald Trump's defense. He's saying, well, you can't do it to me because it's double jeopardy, which it is not. An impeachment in the United States Congress is not the same as this kind of situation in terms of law. And the other thing, of course, that they are claiming is that a president has absolute immunity, which a president doesn't. Otherwise, Richard Nixon would never have been caught for the June 21st tape dealing with Watergate, the discussion that he had with Bob Haldeman. So there's no doubt to me that how the Supreme Court will rule. However, it is political. And Donald Trump put 3 justices on the court who could rule in his favor. But let me point out, in the case of the United States versus Richard Nixon, that what happened was that Nixon put people on the court who voted against him. And of course, most importantly was Justice Rehnquist, who recused himself because he knew everybody. And by the way, Clarence Thomas should do the same thing. His wife has been directly involved in these conspiracy theories. However, Rehnquist did the right thing. I'm not sure Ginny Thomas will do the right thing, but in any case...
Or Clarence Thomas, right?
Well, it's Jenny who would, because it's his wife, of course, Clarence Thomas. So my feeling, Kim, is that no one is above the law.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court ruling should be very clear. However, as we now know, and we're going to talk about the abortion case, and we'll talk about the use of drug to allow a person to terminate a pregnancy, the Supreme Court is now interfering in a variety of ways, in ways that I would not necessarily like to see. It was particularly with Roe v. Wade. I was indignant because one of the questions that was asked each of the three who were put on the court was, would they obey precedent? Would they go with what the court had ruled before? And all three said, oh, yes, of course we would. We'd never overturn a precedent, but of course they did. So my suggestion in the case of Donald Trump, the good news is the court has fast-tracked it. The second bit of good news is that we will now know before March whether or not this trial can go ahead. What Jack Smith did was courageous, important, and vital. And so now we have to wait and see what the court does.
And you're talking about him asking the Supreme Court to weigh in quickly on whether presidential immunity applies here.
That's right, Jack Smith.
That's right. And I was talking to David K. Johnston yesterday, and he was pretty confident and saying, it's very clear that Jack Smith has a high confidence that he's right in this matter.
He is right in the matter, but it's not a question of right or wrong, Kim. It's a question of what the justices decide.
That's right. And I don't trust them. How do you think it's going to come down on a court that, I don't know, we've seen and come down conservatively time and time again?
See, I hope the court views this according to precedent. Richard Nixon, that case, the United States versus Richard Nixon, was fast-tracked. He had to produce the tapes. He claimed executive privilege. They said no. When a criminal matter is involved, you have to give the information. That's why the tapes were released. I hope that this court will follow that precedent. We were lucky in the Nixon case. It was 8 to nothing with one abstention, if you will, the recusal of Rehnquist. So my hope is that the court will do the right thing. Right. There is no question in my mind, and I think anybody who's read the January 6th report knows, and if you had ears, you heard the attempt to obstruct the counting of the electoral vote. And you saw Mike Pence insist on coming back to make sure the process was completed. So I have to tell you, to me, it's cut and dried. But we won't know until the court rules.
Yeah. Since we're talking about the Supreme Court, let's kind of roll back a little bit and talk about this mifepristone that the court has decided now to weigh in on whether there will be limits on this medication that's used to abort pregnancies early on. And this could affect the when as well, going from 10 weeks down to 7. So there could be new restrictions put on this. And it's just another way, it seems to me, to limit access to women who are really needing reproductive care.
You're absolutely right. And it goes to show something I've said for years and years and years. We don't just vote for a president. We vote for who will serve on the Supreme Court. Right. Because the president nominates them. And I hope the American people rise up next November and frankly, tell the Republicans enough is enough. This is a serious question. If I were a woman, I would be very angry. Yep. And I'm a man and I'm angry. The idea of limiting a woman's right is just beyond my comprehension. And look what happened in the Texas case, where the Texas Supreme Court is stacked by Republicans. They ruled that this particular woman could not proceed with the abortion, even though a lower court had said she could. She had to travel out of state, but she has the means to travel out of state. Right. What happens if somebody doesn't have the means to travel out of state? It is appalling and shocking. And when you listen to what the Attorney General of Texas had to say, his disregard for women's rights is just astounding. So I am absolutely adamant about the right of a woman to choose. Yeah. It's not a question of whether you're for or against abortion. It's whether you are in favor of a woman's right to control her own body. And let me tell you, if somebody tried to control my body as a man, I'd be just as angry.
I'm horribly angry, and I'm feeling right now really sad for this woman. And also thankful that she has put her identity out there and put her story out there, because now she kind of becomes the face of this. Here's this horrible situation, a woman that wants to this was a wanted pregnancy, and so I just don't know if this is what they meant by.
The so-called pro-life people don't want a woman to have the right to
No.
choose,
Mm-mm.
don't want a woman to have the right to have a pregnancy.
Mhm.
If they had their way, there'd be no surrogate pregnancy. There'd be no in vitro pregnancy. There'd be nothing, because their view is absolute. I remember as a kid going to a catechism class. Nice Jewish boy that I am. I used to go to
Mhm.
catechism class with my friends. And we learned that masturbation was the equivalent of murder because you were misusing sperm,
Oh God.
which could be used for reproduction.
Yeah.
And one of my Catholic friends used to say when he went to confession, he had to confess that he had masturbated so
Oh
many
God.
times, and that this is absurd,
Yeah.
and we have to overwhelmingly rise up and repudiate it. And I'm counting on something, Kim, and that is the American people saying to the Republicans, enough is enough. I was shocked last night, not shocked, but disturbed by Ron DeSantis, who equivocated on the issue. And there is no excuse for anyone. Barry Goldwater had it right. Mr. Republican, Mr. Conservative. He said, I'd kick the ass, and I can say that on a
Mhm.
podcast, I
Mhm.
would kick the ass of these religious fanatics right out. So between a woman and her doctor.
That's
So
right.
if you want to have an abortion, you should have the right. Now, these Republicans throw up the whole thing. What happens if you're in the last trimester or a week before you're going to deliver? That is so unusual, but it happens. I know a woman who had to terminate a pregnancy just weeks before she was going to deliver.
It's
She was doing it
devastating.
because her health was in danger and the
Yeah.
baby was deformed.
Yeah.
Should she have the right to do it? You bet she should.
Yeah.
And no court in the land
Yeah.
should be able to obstruct that right.
I know in my heart and mind that the abortion issue is not a political one. It becomes something that's between me and my doctor, but or a woman and her doctor. But in this particular case, we saw what happened in Ohio, where Ohio voters stood up and said, no, we don't like what you're doing with abortion in our state, right? And so you would think that in Texas, with the presidential election looming, this was a moment for Texas Republicans to appear to have a heart, right? To let this woman go easily and do what she needs to do because she's, her fetus has been diagnosed with trisomy 18, which is, fatal. If it doesn't die in utero, it'll die, in the couple days afterward. So this is a moment that they could have said, listen, this isn't what we meant by an abortion ban. We want to do something nice by this woman, or we want to take care of this woman, what have you. But they didn't do that. They doubled down and they got even uglier with it. And let me tell you, what's happening with this woman in Texas, Kate Cox, has pissed off women around America. So they just basically threw down a lightning rod, and we'll pick it up and go to the ballot
Sure,
box
we're
with
going to go
it.
to the ballot box. But look,
Mhm.
may I explain to you? Many a night on KGO, I would discuss the question of a woman's right to choose.
Mhm.
And many of you who listened on KGO know that I immediately got calls from people who said, but abortion is murder. I even had people who had the audacity to tell me that it was another Holocaust.
Mm.
And this is a completely irrational approach, but one that exists, and it is a political matter. But I believe absolutely unconditionally that it's between a woman and her doctor. And may I tell you the other thing that absolutely infuriated me? The idea that a doctor could be prosecuted for participating in
Mhm.
eliminating a pregnancy, could go to jail, could lose his or her license. It's absurd. And if you believe in limited government, well, look, I've told the story before, Kim. When I was in college, before Roe v. Wade was law, I was head resident of my dormitory, and we had men and women. The women were in an annex, and I used to go on inspection tours. And one day I went into the women's area, and the door was ajar, and I heard groaning, and I knocked. This woman had had just a terrible abortion, and she was bleeding. And I wrapped her up, put her in my car, drove her down in Whittier to Presbyterian Hospital. The doctor said if I had not gotten there, 10 minutes later, it would have been too late. She would have died.
No. Yeah.
Now, and the most interesting thing for me is I told this story on the air, and somebody who lived in Murphy Hall in my dorm, where I was head resident, called and said, "Oh, we remember, John, you were a hero that night."
Mm-hmm.
But to many, too many in this country, the idea of a woman's right to choose is a Holocaust. It's murder. And that we had this discussion a long time ago about in vitro, the question of whether or not someone who wants to get pregnant should have the right to do it. And frankly, there are people who say absolutely not. And one of these days, they're going to go to court and stop that as well. I can see it. Everybody can see it. Yeah. And thank God, 7 states, including Kansas, have stood up and said absolutely not. And look what happened in Ohio in the last election. So I just have to tell you, I wish the court would not rule on this, would butt out.
Exactly.
They have no business doing it. It's between a woman, her doctor, and her pharmacist.
Right. Randy writes, why did I think Texas Republicans would do the right thing with this woman? And Randy, I didn't think they would. They didn't. And I didn't think they would do it because they care about women or they care about her. But I thought maybe the political pressure, right? After, as John mentioned,
they don't care.
Seeing what happened in Ohio.
They don't care.
That this is an election year. I thought maybe that would make them reel it in a little bit and have a heart. But
they don't care, Kim, because they believe it is a religious question, that it is murder. And that is the tragedy. Why would a doctor who performs an abortion be put on trial for murder? Because that is the ruling of, frankly, people who believe that abortion is murder. That was the teaching of the Catholic Church for years. Mm-hmm. That's the teaching of too many people who, and they can believe it. Listen, if you don't want to have an abortion, don't have an abortion. If you don't want to have in vitro fertilization, don't have in vitro fertilization. Yeah. If you, that's your choice. But the minute it becomes law, then you're impinging on someone else's right to freedom. And can you imagine this woman's pregnancy was doomed to failure? No. And she already has 2 children, but she might want to have more. That if this pregnancy were not terminated, she might never be able to have another child.
No.
I mean, it is sheer lunacy. But may I point out again, because we were talking about Donald Trump and the Supreme Court, that who is president matters.
Very much.
And I have said this over and over again, and I'm going to say it one more time. If you put a Republican in the White House, you are going to have this kind of court. And that, frankly, scares the bejeebers out of me.
It does. And it's when you look at someone like Liz Cheney, you think, oh, she's proven that she puts her country over herself, that, it would be the kind of president. But then I look at what she thinks about things like abortion and how she would, further a Supreme Court that would be against reproductive rights. And I just can't go there.
Well, Liz Cheney was in favor was rather opposed to same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. Do you know why she's flipped her position? Her sister is gay.
Yeah.
And her sister is married. One would think that if people are confronted in a very personal way, they would understand. But I'm afraid those who believe that abortion is murder, that it's another Holocaust, there's no rational way to deal with them. And that's a crime. That's the crime, by the way.
Let's move to Israel.
Sure.
President Biden was at a campaign reception yesterday, and he said that of Israel, it has most of the world supporting it, but they are starting to lose that support by the indiscriminate bombing that takes place. That's what the president said.
Mm-hmm.
I got an email yesterday um, from a listener viewer who knew that you were coming on today, and she wanted me to ask you about whether young people are having their support dwindle because of what's happening with President Biden, that they're having their support not only dwindle for Israel, but also for President Biden because of his stance of supporting Israel. Um, so can you respond to that? And then we'll kind of get into what happened at the UN yesterday as well.
Sure. First of all, it's not indiscriminate bombing. The Israelis have targeted bombing. Somebody said to me, well, Israel's committing genocide. I said, really? If they were committing genocide, there wouldn't be a Palestinian alive. They would slaughter them all. That's not Israel's position. The people to blame for what is happening now is Hamas. Where did Hamas base themselves? In the middle of hospitals and schools and civilian areas. And yes, in the middle of Gaza. So I have to tell you, I have tremendous sympathy for the Palestinian people. I think what is happening is terrible. Most Israelis believe that as well. But when you have Hamas saying, if we can do it again tomorrow, we will, what happened on October 7th, the Israelis ask, what choice do they have? And I can only tell you, no one rejoices at the death of innocent people, Israeli or Palestinian. Nobody rejoices. But the Israelis are not going to roll over and play dead. They're not going to allow it to happen again. And may I also say to you, it is not unusual for President Biden to be critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. They've always had a tense relationship, friendly, but tense. I don't think it would matter who is prime minister of Israel. This is not a matter of Benjamin Netanyahu. The leadership of Israel, left, right, and center, have agreed, because of Hamas's attitude, that they have no choice. All Hamas would have to do is release the hostages. Still, the war crime would have been committed. The mass slaughter of October the 7th would have been committed. But Hamas is simply saying, give us the opportunity, we'll do it again. So I understand within the Democratic Party, and there's one example that's really important, and that's Michigan, where the Arab and Muslim vote is considerable. And it supported Biden because they viewed Trump as being too pro-Israel. I still think that Michigan will vote for Biden because the issues involving the people of Michigan are very clear. But I don't know. I don't know whether you can ever ask a nation which has been attacked, and I don't know another nation which warns people in advance of bombing, for God's sake.
Yeah,
the Israelis warn them, and the Israelis have gone out of their way to do it. Are terrible things happening? You bet they are. And if I were going to blame somebody, it's Hamas. The Israelis could have done nothing. And what then? You know, I mean,
is there anything the Israelis can do to limit the attacks on areas where there are civilians that
have Hamas move out? Hamas goes into the middle of civilian areas, Kim. It looks for human shields. I don't know what the Israelis can do. I really don't. How do you accomplish what needs to be accomplished when Hamas relishes the idea of people dying? I don't know.
I've read that international support for Israel, which was high right after October 7th and the attack, is dwindling now. Do you feel that that's true? And if it is true, is it because of the images we're seeing of innocents dying? Why are
Of course it is.
why is the support falling?
I'm repelled by what is happening. But then again, the United Nations, which has once again called for a ceasefire, has still not condemned what Hamas did on October 7th, neither the General Assembly or the Security Council. And the Israelis are saying, okay, you want to be upset with us? Great. But let me tell you, Kim, the United Nations has a history. Do you know they have never passed a resolution condemning terror? Never. But do you know the nation in the world which has been condemned routinely year after year? The United Nations condemns Israel. It is an astounding double standard. That doesn't excuse the fact that people should be appalled by innocents dying. They should be. I am.
Mhm.
But I want to emphasize again, there has never been by the United Nations a condemnation of Hamas. Nothing. Nothing. October 7th doesn't exist in the United Nations. That's appalling. So I will tell you bluntly, for every action, there's a reaction. The
Mhm.
Israelis are saying, okay, if you took a vote in the world, most people in the world would not vote for Israel. The anti Israel sentiment in the United Nations is legendary. All you have to go back and look at is the infamous Zionism is Racism resolution, which was passed on November 10th, 1975. Only once in the United Nations history has a resolution been rescinded. And that resolution was rescinded in December of 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union and after the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. So the United Nations has always had a double standard when it comes to Israel.
Yeah.
Does it reduce the support in the world? You know, the Israelis have been made very clear. They would rather have support reduced and be alive than have a lot of support and all be dead.
Well, what does it mean for Israel when support is reduced across the world stage? You know, if they if they're standing alone, they're not going to get as far as if they're working with allies.
Let me tell you, Israel has allies, the European nations,
Mhm.
the United States, Egypt and Jordan, and the Arab Emirates. They may not approve of every action Israel takes, but they support Israel. Israel's economy is booming, trade is up, tourism has been limited somewhat by the war, but the Israelis are not going to go back to be isolated. I mean, it just isn't going to happen. And remember, the goal of Hamas and the enemies of Israel, including Iran, is the destruction of Israel. I mean, that's all there is to it. They want every Jew eliminated, not just from Israel. Look what's happening in our own country. Look what happened, Kim, this last week
Yeah.
with 3 university presidents who would not condemn genocide against Jews. I
Yeah.
mean, what in the world has happened? I heard that and I thought, what are they talking about? Now, Penn's president was forced out, as was the chairman of the board.
Sure.
Harvard and MIT have decided to keep their president, their presidents who refused to condemn genocide against Jews. But I'm going to tell you, I'm thoroughly disgusted. Can you imagine? Just think for a minute, Kim, if it had been genocide against African Americans, no one would have questioned, or against gays, no one would have questioned. But do you understand? The message sent to Jews is people can commit genocide against you, and it's okay. They call for genocide. We're not going to condemn it. I don't understand. And when you ask the question about Israel, that's what the Israelis are curious about. Why is there such a double standard? Why is what is permitted to other people, that is, sanctity, opposition to genocide, not permitted to Jews? It's. I know that a lot of you listening are going to say, "Well, John, you're overreacting." Trust me, I'm not. I'm telling you exactly what the Jewish community believes. I just got a note from my synagogue asking for a contribution because they need to beef up security at the synagogue.
They
Do you
sure
know that
do.
one synagogue here in
Mhm.
town is renting space from a Catholic school because they couldn't? They're doing reconstruction at their own synagogue. You know what was written on the wall of that Catholic school, not far from my house? Death to the Jews, free Palestine. In San Francisco. I mean, I find it mind-boggling. Why would it be so difficult for someone to condemn genocide? By the way, not just university presidents. How about the United Nations?
Yeah.
Is it so inconceivable, so wrong to ask that what happened on October 7th be formally condemned? I mean, is it wrong? Of course not. Now, I'm not excusing the fact that innocent people are dying. Let
Right.
me be crystal clear. I've worked with Palestinians for years. They're human beings like everybody else. This is not against Palestinians. It is against Hamas. And well, I don't know what else I can add, Kim, except the double standard that we feel as Jews and that Israelis feel in the world um, is very clear. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, there wouldn't be a Palestinian standing.
Does President Biden is he losing support because of his support of Israel? And in an election year when he's trying to defeat someone like Trump, who is a danger to America, in my belief, does he have to worry about and and have his actions affected by political opinion of now with the tide turning, and it seems like more people are feeling that maybe the United States shouldn't support Israel as strongly.
To a degree, but did you hear what you can play it? I mean, Albert can pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden said, "I am a Zionist. I may be a Christian, but I'm a Zionist. I know that if there were no Israel, Jews in the world would not be safe." That's the whole point. And I admire Joe Biden for his courage on a whole variety of issues. And he has been resolute in his support of Israel.
Which is interesting that he would say he's a Zionist, because a lot of people don't know what that means, and it's a kind of a dirty word.
No, but you see, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell you a funny story. I brought Menachem Begin to San Francisco in 1975, many years ago. And one of the leaders of the Jewish community, it was at the height of the Zionism as racism thing. Begin was exhausted. He said to me before he came into the room, he said, "John, I just 15 minutes. I have to rest. I'm just flown in. I think he flew in from Puerto Rico." He said, "I'm exhausted. Please." I said, "Okay, Mr. Begin." So we come in and he speaks for 10 minutes. And then he says, "And now I'll take questions." And one of the people in the room who happened to have been related to me, said, "Excuse me, Mr. Begin, can't you do something about this dirty word Zionism?" And Begin, who was tired and slumped over, all of a sudden the blood rushed to his face. He was alert as one could be. And he said, "My dear Mr. Zionism is the scaffolding upon which Israel was created. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people." And then Begin went on for half an hour. I wish there'd been a tape recorder, with the most brilliant refutation, because Zionism is not a dirty word. We have had many Christian Zionists in this country, liberals, conservatives. My old friend Bob Drinan, who was a Catholic priest and member of Congress, the first one to introduce a resolution to impeach Richard Nixon. Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, you can get down the list. And Republicans who say they are Zionists as well. All Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to have what every other people in the world have. And so when you use the term dirty word, it immediately sprang to mind. When Begin was asked that question, he erupted. So did Pat Moynihan, if you remember. Pat Moynihan, who was our ambassador to the United Nations on November 10th, 1975, you can hear his speech, by the way, on YouTube, was indignant. And he took that resolution, which was passed by the United Nations, and tore it up. And I will tell you that the rescission of the Zionism is Racism resolution on December the 16th, 1991, was an incredible accomplishment. And only happened because there was peace between Israel and some Arab states, because the Soviet Union collapsed, and because the United States stood firm.
Yeah. Let's move to, if we could, the visit to Washington, D.C. by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He's trying to get some money to keep this war going, and it's kind of
wait. Excuse me. It's not to keep a war going. It's to resist Russian aggression.
And to end the war in his favor, I would imagine.
Yes.
But he needs support, because he needs to be able to continue to defend his country. And one of the things that President Biden said last year was that the United States will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. And then recently, yesterday, President Biden said the United States will stand with Ukraine as long as we can. So as long as it takes versus as long as we can, that's kind of a big difference.
Look, it's the Republicans. Why isn't the Ukraine aid and the Israel aid bill passing? First, because the aid to Ukraine and the aid to Israel is linked. But number two, the Republicans are saying we have to secure our own southern border before we worry about Ukraine. This is, unfortunately, a history of the Republican Party. They were the leaders of isolationism in 1940, when France fell just before the Republican convention. Thank God the Republicans nominated Wendell Willkie, who was an internationalist, and said we have to help the British. What if Bob Taft had been nominated in 1940? There would have been no Lend-Lease, and Hitler would have won the war. Look, we have a commitment to Ukraine, and I point a finger at the Republicans. And let me be clear, Kim, I'm not bashing Republicans because they're Republicans. I think the Republican Party serves a vital role in this country. I was once upon a time a Republican. But to oppose aid to Ukraine, to obstruct it, to tie it to our own border problems, it's just crazy. Yeah. If I were Zelensky leaving Washington, I would be very upset, because without the support of Europe, which is basically now doing everything they can for Ukraine, and the United States, Ukraine can't resist. Putin will win. Did you watch Russian television?
No.
They are rejoicing. Putin is rejoicing at what is happening in Washington, D.C. It is just appalling. And I have to tell you, as vigorously as I will oppose Republicans on the question of women's right to choose, their attitude on Ukraine has to be exposed to the American people. Talk to people from Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. They're terrified. If Putin wins in Ukraine, the Russian bear will claw its way back into Europe. And everyone understands that. And I think the Republicans are being very short-sighted. But then again, the Republicans traditionally have been isolationists. Yeah. Republicans have not wanted our involvement in the world. Thank God. Thank God. Let me just quickly, very quickly. Why did the League of Nations fail in 1919? Because of the Republicans. Henry Cabot Lodge Sr., Hiram Johnson of California, William Borah of Idaho. They opposed the League of Nations. If the League of Nations had existed, Hitler might not have succeeded. There might not have been a World War II. At the end of the Second World War, Franklin Roosevelt had great wisdom. He put Harold Stassen on the American delegation, and Arthur Vandenberg, senator from Michigan, who was, by the way, a great isolationist and became a great internationalist. The Republican Party needs to understand our role in the world. The United States is the economic backbone of the world. The United States is the protector of the world. Let me throw one more thing out to you. I know we have limited time. There's never enough time with Kim McAllister. But the question of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Trump is making clear he will withdraw from NATO. Can you imagine if the United States pulled back from NATO? What Putin would then, he'd have a green light. I mean, the irresponsible comments by Donald Trump and by his supporters, the entire approach to our role in the world. My favorite book growing up, a book I still read and reflect on, is a book by Wendell Willkie called One World. It came out in the middle of World War II, became a bestseller, and laid the groundwork for bipartisan support for American involvement in the world, particularly the founding of the United Nations. So I want to be crystal clear on this. The Republican obstruction of aid to Ukraine is a black mark on the Republican Party. And so I hope that those of you who are Republicans will stand up and say to the Republicans in the House, let's get busy on this.
Let's talk about Hunter Biden, because things are heating up at the Capitol. What we know today is that Hunter Biden will not respond to a Republican subpoena surrounding his business dealings.
No, that's not true.
Well, that's what he says.
Oh, no.
They wanted.
He responded this morning. He said,
I won't testify behind closed doors.
Right,
I will only do
a
it
public
publicly.
hearing.
That's right. So Republicans wanted Hunter Biden to testify privately, but in a surprise move, the president's son held a press conference outside of the Capitol and said he will only testify in a public hearing. The House Republicans say President Biden benefited from his son's foreign business dealings and that they will vote soon on an impeachment inquiry. And
this afternoon,
according to CNN, 5:45 Eastern time is when Republicans plan to begin votes on the floor to formalize the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. And so this kind of, flouting the subpoena, or,
oh, you mean like Jim Jordan did? You mean like Jim Jordan did when he refused to testify on the January 6th committee? Oh, give me a break.
Is there I guess when you formally uh, accept an impeachment inquiry, you can then your subpoenas have more power, or I don't know, but they still don't have the proof. And every time they say they have the proof, it's a big fat zero.
You're right. You're
So
right. How many
what's the
times have
point?
we said, "Oh, we'll find out what's really happening," and there's
Mhm.
nothing. It's a nothing burger. No, look. If Hunter Biden is guilty, let him stand trial and let him be found guilty and let him be punished. If
Right.
he goes to jail, that's what the law says. But Joe Biden is not Hunter Biden. And the argument that Joe Biden profited financially, there's no proof. The one
None.
thing the Republicans came up with turned out to be a repaid car loan. I mean, give me a
That's
break.
it. Yeah.
So, but it's embarrassing
Yeah.
for this country. And let's remember, that I've been talking about impeachment since Richard Nixon's days, and during the Clinton impeachment process, I was used nationally as a leading expert on impeachment. I don't say it to blow my own horn. And I had another expert on impeachment on my program, Mark Thompson's father, who wrote the definitive book on impeachment. By the way, I discovered that, and I called this guy in Washington, D.C., and I said, "I'm with KGO." He said, "Oh, you must know my son." I said, Who's your son?" Because Mark operates professionally under a different name. Uh, I am so outraged. Now, people ask me, what about the Trump impeachment? Okay,
Mhm.
or the Clinton impeachment. Let's go back. Clinton, there were grounds. The Monica Lewinsky thing was real. He did lie. He did apologize to the American people. And
Mhm.
his law license was suspended in Arkansas. His ability to practice before the Supreme Court was suspended. I mean, there were consequences for Bill Clinton, although he didn't
Sure.
lose his job because people said it didn't rise to the level. Okay. But
Sure.
Donald Trump, people say two impeachments of Donald Trump. Well, the first one over Ukraine was a partisan witch hunt. That's what they say. Well, I have to tell you, the Republicans, even when the facts were presented to them, were unprepared to vote for impeachment, except for Mitt Romney, who in the January 6th committee, oh, the Republicans saved Donald Trump. There was no way he could be saved, I thought. I was so wrong because they said, you can't impeach him. He's not president anymore. That was their argument. And thank God, Mitt Romney, in a profile and courage moment, the
Mhm.
former Republican candidate for president of the United States, former governor of Massachusetts, senator from the state of Utah, stood up and said he's guilty. Well, I have to tell you, the Republican Party has a lot to defend that I think is indefensible. And if this were a real debate, I'd have great fun. By the way, I listened to Ron DeSantis last night.
Mhm.
I mean, he touched all the right Republican bases, but he had no runs, no hits, no errors. Albert, that's for you. I was giving you a sports analogy. No runs, no hits, no errors. But what did he say? And let me tell you, he's got a problem.
Yeah.
We are coming up on the first caucus in Iowa, and he has visited all 99 counties. He has a tremendous field team there. And you know what, Kim? He's going to lose. And I think
Yeah.
he's going to lose big. And that'll be the end of Ron DeSantis, I hope, as a candidate for president. But wait,
It
the
was a
good
CNN
news.
anchor that said she smelled on Ron DeSantis the stench of political death.
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
and then there's, of course, Nikki Haley, who got the endorsement of Chris Sununu. Now, uh, Nikki Haley is very articulate, very able. I would never vote for her because we disagree on too many issues.
Right.
But I think Donald Trump is going to run them all over. Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for president unless something dramatic happens. But even more shocking to me is the polls that show 70 to 80% of Republican voters, even if Trump were guilty of the 91 charges, they'd still vote for him. I mean,
I
unconscionable.
I don't understand how people could be this way. I don't get it.
Cult. It's a cult.
Well,
It's
House
a cult.
Speaker Mike Johnson is saying they think they actually have the votes to launch this formal impeachment inquiry.
Yeah.
So here we go again.
And that will be this afternoon.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to stay tuned because I want to hear Ramaswamy talk about
Mm.
somebody who is completely disreputable. And just an appalling. He believes in all the conspiracy theories, Kim. He's going to spend an hour on CNN. I can't wait for that. But you want to have a real contrast? David Frost, who's most famous for the Nixon interviews, did a series of interviews in 1968. The book is published. of all of the interviews he did with presidential candidates and the Republican and Democratic potential candidates, including Bobby Kennedy, including Eugene McCarthy, but all the Republicans. To this day, it's a model for the kind of interrogation that Republican candidates and Democratic candidates for president should go through. So, I know that people sometimes say to me, John, you refer too much to history. That's the only way I can put all of this in context. It's the only way I understand what is really happening. And I would commend people to read David Frost's book on the presidential candidates in '68. Read those interviews and then listen to what we are getting today. One other quick comment. I haven't been on, I don't think, since the so-called debate between Newsom and DeSantis. It wasn't a debate. No. It was a shouting match.
It was awful.
It was absolutely. You want to hear a real debate? Go Google Stas and Dewey debate, May 17th, 1948. Resolved the Communist Party should be abolished in the United States. It's 1 hour where two presidential candidates really went at each other. It's the last real debate, and it was wonderful. What we see now, I said it's May 19th, not May 17th. Sorry about that. May 19th. I want to correct myself. But I'm interested tonight in how Ramaswamy is presented, because here's a guy who believes in all the conspiracy theories. One thing, I just have to throw this in. Did you hear DeSantis last night attack Dr. Fauci? He did it in a throwaway line, as if Fauci had been responsible for crippling this country. And of course, the Republicans are still talking about the China conspiracy, that it was all in. I mean, you listen to this stuff, and what happened to the party of Lincoln? What happened to the party of Eisenhower? The party of Reagan? I mean, what happened to... I have a shelf here in my library. I could carry the computer over and show you books about the Republican Party. My dear friend Luke Gould, who wrote The History of the Republican Party, the paperback is published by Oxford University. It paints a portrait of a party of conviction, of a party of real belief, a party of great personalities. What we have in the Republican Party today is a joke, and that worries me. Let me make a comment about Liz Cheney. She's talking about running as a third-party candidate for president. We could have a whole hour, Kim, on third-party candidates for president. The last third-party candidate for president to be elected was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Most third parties are an obstacle in an election.
Yes,
I would remind you that Al Gore would have won clearly in Florida had it not been for Pat Buchanan in 2000. So I'm not against third parties, but if you're going to build a third party, read it and build it the way the Republicans did. They ran candidates for the House, Senate, and governor in 1856, 1858, and 1860. They built a party from the bottom up, not from the top down. So I'm very concerned about that. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. talking about running as an independent. You know, the good news is it's tough to get on the ballot as an independent. But if you run as a third-party candidate, winning the nomination of an established political party, a third party, you get on the ballot, you can do tremendous damage. And we've seen that time and time again.
You want more of John Rothmann? Check out his podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothmann, 2 N's at the end, wherever you get your podcasts, and you will find it. John Rothmann, thank you for being
free.
on the
By the way, the podcast is free.
It's free.
And I'm delighted to report we've had 100,000 downloads. It's now up over 100,000.
So good.
That's because, in part, the cooperation of the Mark Thompson program and Kim and Albert and, of course, Mark.
Hey, which one do you use, Mark Thompson?
Not here today. Thank you for being here, John Rothmann.
Thanks, Kim. Anytime for you. Are we on for next week? Because Mark is still
on for next week. He's going to be gone for a while.
One more thing. I know you got to go.
Yeah.
I was going to show you the cartoon of all the animals running away because Theodore Roosevelt was going on safari. And I think Mark Thompson, all the animals should beware. He's not going to shoot you. It's okay.
No, he's a friend of the creature. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Talk to you later.
Bye. John Rothmann, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel. to help us save the universe.